Call the meeting to order. Please note that applicants will have 15 minutes to present their application. If more time is needed, please ask at the beginning of the hearing, and the board will discuss the request. Members of the public will have 5 minutes each to present their comments. During this time, please address all comments to the board and not the applicants. The first item of business is Roman numeral 1, approval of minutes. Do I have a motion on the approval of the January 22, 2025 meeting minutes?
Madam Chair, I've got a suggested edit.
Sure, go ahead.
On page 22, I'm sorry, page 5.
Yes?
Hang on a sec, let me make sure I'm in the right spot. Page 5 in the meeting package, it's page 3 of the minutes. The very last sentence of the first paragraph, I would suggest revising it to say, Mr. Neese noted that information was not carried over to the summary table.
Okay. Any other corrections? Mr. Am?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Page 8 of the minutes, about 2/3 of the way down the page in the paragraph that begins, timestamp 2:10:16. There's a sentence that says, Mr. Rayom noted that the packet showed it as a right yard encroachment instead of a left yard one. Just to be a little bit clearer about that, I would like to change that to Mr. Rayom noted that the staff memo showed it as a right yard encroachment instead of a left yard one. Similarly, on page 9, paragraph near the top of the page begins, Vice Chair Margerson said the packet showed a stamp for the Rockingham County Registry of Deeds. My recommendation would be, it would say, Chair Margerson said the lot line adjustment plan showed a stamp of the Rockingham County Registry of Deeds. Being that your quote, I would defer to you if you feel that's appropriate or not, but I think that, as I recall, that was your intent.
Yes, I concur.
And then on page 10, again, the very top paragraph, sentence, Mr. Rayom said he supported the motion, noting that the front porch was an open structure with a lot of open space around the home and property and was something that he thought the board would have easily allowed. Just to clarify that, prior to construction, that was the point, was this was an after the fact variance. So the words prior to construction should be added. That's all I have. Thank you.
Okay, are there any other corrections, modifications, amendments?
I make a motion to move the minutes.
Second,
amended.
please.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Meeting minutes of January 22nd, 2025 are approved. The next order of business is approval of the January 28th, 2025 meeting minutes. Do I have a motion on that?
Madam Chair, I move to approve with but one correction.
Yes, please
or
continue.
Potential correction, if I can find it. I know I wrote it down. Actually, I apologize. I can't seem to find what I thought I had written. So
While Mr. Rayum is searching, does anybody else have any changes or amendments to the meeting minutes of January 28th? So we have to,
I will just move to accept the minutes.
okay.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Chair votes aye. The January 28th, 2025 meeting minutes are approved. So moving on to Roman numeral 2, old business of the agenda, 84 Pleasant Street, rehearing request. This request was filed at our last meeting in January. Members of the board had concerns that there were some photos and illustrations that were referenced which were not included in the packet submitted to the board members. So it was continued until this meeting. And so what we are doing is we will not be taking public comment on the request, so this is not a public hearing. The board will evaluate the information provided and vote to grant or deny the rehearing request. If the board votes to grant the request, a hearing will be scheduled for next month's board meeting or at another time to be determined by the board. And in order to rehear this request, it requires a majority vote of members present and voting, or in the case of a tie vote, 3 affirmative votes. So, I'd like to open this up to the members. Mr. Neese, it looks like you're about to say something. I don't like dead space.
I'm going to hold off for a minute if I might, Madam Chair.
Yes. Mr. Ram?
Thank you, Madam Chair. As I recall, I was the individual who made the successful motion this is kind of an interesting situation. We did have the applicant who came before us. We granted almost all of the relief that the applicant was looking for. We did deny one of the requested variances. But it is not the applicant who is requesting a rehearing on that denied variance, rather that it is one of the abutters who is requesting a rehearing on one of the variances that we did grant, which is the item 2B, which is a 4-story addition at 50 feet height up to the Church Street elevation, where 3 full stories and a short fourth are allowed in a 45 feet maximum height permitted. So the applicants, or the appellant really, their argument is that we weren't entirely clear in our reasons for granting that particular variance. Certainly, this was a complicated project. It had many aspects to it. There were a number of, the variances had lots of numbers in them, being part of the, one of our areas that we do the more complicated type of zoning, that as a result, some of the requirements in here are, very specific in terms of glass coverage, shop front, facade glazing, these sort of, height differences where certain things are permitted with certain characteristics and other things are not permitted. So I certainly would have to say that they are correct in the sense that there is some complexity associated with this. I think as a board, we tried to deal with it the best we could. I think as the one making the motion, I tried to make it as clear as possible. That said, there is, some potential that our decision-making was not as clearly articulated as it could have been. We do the best that we can, but with some of these complicated applications, it is sometimes difficult to maybe hit on every characteristic for every one of the requests for variances. And as a result, I think there's some merit maybe to rehearing this, only to reconsider just that one variance. I would not reconsider the whole entire project. I think that the other variances that we granted and the variance that we deny are in the case. But for this 2B, if for no other reason than to make it crystal clear what the board's intent was. But that said, I could go either way. I think that would be the only reason, or the only way that I would consider a rehearing would be, again, very specific to variance 2B, and in an attempt to perhaps clarify the board's intent, or perhaps to revisit the issue entirely. I mean, it would be up to the board to make that decision.
Thank you, Mr. Ram. Anybody else's? Mr. Neese?
I generally agree with Mr. Ram. I went back and read the minutes and read the findings of fact. I listened to much of the discussion that we had on the video, and I think there is a legitimate concern that we did not clearly elaborate on how the criteria were met for 2B with respect to Church Street and the 50-foot height. So I think that a rehearing would give us the opportunity to either clarify how that was reached or perhaps a different decision. But in any case, I think it would clarify the record. And based on that, unless someone else would like to comment, I'm ready to make a motion.
Well, I would like to know the board's ideas about just rehearing the variance denial on 2B, or whether or not to rehear the entire application. Mr. Mattson?
I would say I'm more inclined to only hear the request for the one, for 2B. That portion of the overall application is what the rehearing is requested for, so I'd be comfortable with that.
Okay. Any thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, if we're going to go through with a rehearing, it should be specific to what they're requesting, which is strictly 2B, because we denied 2A. And reading their complaint, that seems to be the basis of it. So, yeah, if it's just 2B, I can do a rehearing.
We denied 2B. I'm sorry, we approved 2B, and we denied the other variance requests that night.
We denied 2A only. We approved all of 1 and
Yeah.
2B, or not 2B. No, wait a minute.
2A was the only one we denied.
2A
That
was the only one we
townhouse.
denied.
Okay. All right. So I will be ready for a motion then, unless there's any more discussion. Mr. Mattson, you said you were ready for a motion?
Or actually, Mr. Nyes.
I move to grant the request for rehearing on the granting of variance 2B alone.
Second.
Any discussion?
I think we've explained the rationale. My argument for this is that I don't think the record clearly establishes the ZBA's rationale for granting the variance, and it does not clearly describe the special conditions of the property that warrant the variance.
Okay.
I apologize.
No.
There may be others, but I think those are enough to justify the motion.
Okay. So we will do a roll.
Nothing further to add.
Nothing further? Okay. I'll do a roll call vote, and I'll start with Ms. Record. Yes. Mr. Neese?
Yes?
Mr. Mannel?
Yes.
I got to skip over. Mr. Ram?
Yes.
Mr. Mattson?
Yes.
And the vice chair votes yes. So we will rehear that at the March 18th hearing. How does the agenda look for that day, Jillian, do you know?
I don't have any word yet on that.
Okay, all right. All right. The next matter of old business is Roman numeral 2, letter B, 222 Court Street, an extension request. And as described in the packet, the applicant said that this is a, let me just get to it if I could, the extension request. This is an extension request for a variance that we granted on February 28th, 2023, granting a variance for the installation of one 24 by 28 foot mural and one 3 by 2 foot sign. And they are scheduled to, the approvals listed above are scheduled to expire on February 28th, 2025. The ordinance allows for a one-time, one-year extension if the request is acted on prior to the expiration. The applicant has requested an extension as a permit has not yet been obtained, and there's a letter in our packet describing the reason for the extension request, and that is funding that is going to allow them to move forward with the project. Do we have a motion, or is there any discussion?
Make a motion to extend 222 Court Street's approval for 1 year.
Second.
Okay, any discussion?
I would just say, typically I'm always cautious about these extensions. They are, once upon a time, you only had 1 year. The law was changed to allow for 2 years with an option for a third. I have been kind of tired of hearing about COVID issues, but I think in this case, the applicant has come forward with a pretty good description that, they're not for profit. It takes time to be able to collect funds to be able to go and execute this particular mural, which is the source of the reason for the variance request. So therefore, I think that's a very reasonable reason to give the extra year.
Okay. Any additional discussion? Okay. We'll start over at the other end. Mr. Mattson?
Yes.
Mr. Rayam?
Yes.
Mr. Mannel?
Yes.
Mr. Nees?
Yes.
Ms. Record?
Yes.
And the vice chair votes yes. It is extended for 1 year by a vote of 6-0. The next matter of business, we're still in old business, is Roman numeral 2C. And before I read this into the record, we would have to reopen the public hearing. I do want to note that Mr. Rayum is recused tonight, and that leaves with Chair Eldridge's and Mr. Rossi's absence only 5 voting members. And so this, we will ask the applicant if they would like to postpone to the March meeting, as you have 5 voting members.
Please.
Madam Chair, we're prepared to go forward this evening.
Okay, all right. So I'm going to read this into the record, and then we will reopen the public hearing in order to receive additional testimony from the applicant and any other members of the public that are here. So the application is as follows. C, the request of 361 Hanover Stream Factory, LLC owner and Hampshire Development Corporation, LLC applicant for property located at 361 Hanover Street, whereas relief is needed to expand and renovate the existing commercial building and convert it to multifamily residential, and to construct 3 new multifamily residential buildings, which requires the following. 1, a variance from section 10.642 to allow residential principal uses on the ground floor of buildings. And 2, variance from section 10.5A41, figure 10.5A41.10D to A, allow for apartment, row house, and duplex building types where they are not permitted, and B, allow a ground floor height of 10.5 feet where 12 feet is required. Said property is located on Assessor Map 138, Lot 63, and lies within the Character District and the Downtown Overlay District. So we are reopening the public hearing on this. And is the applicant here to speak to this application?
Yes, Madam Chair, members of the board, Attorney John Boson on behalf of the applicant. With me this evening from the owners group is Stephen Wilson and Shane Forsley. We're also accompanied by with our engineer, John Shagnon from Haley Ward. As you know from our prior meetings before this board, my client is looking to renovate its property located at 361 Hanover Street into a multifamily project that will consist of 40 to 48 residential housing units. I know this board has insisted on exact details of our plans, yet our unit count this evening is between 40 to 48. Good reason, because at this stage, as you know, this project still has to go through full site review, where modifications will be made based on input from city staff, from TAC, from planning board, members of the public. So that's the reason why we're giving the unit count as presented. The project design, though, is the project we want to build. And it's shown in our plans and illustrations. And essentially what you have is Building A consisting of 26 to 34 units. Building B will have 4 units. Building C will have 2 units. And Building D will have 8 units. The project will also have a total of 71 on-site parking spaces, which exceed the amount of parking required under the ordinance. This plan requires 3 variances tonight. The first from section 10.642 that requires ground floor commercial uses in the Downtown Overlay District. The second is from the Downtown Overlay District that requires the minimum height of the ground floor level to be 12 feet. And the third is from section 10.5A 41.10D to allow apartment row house and duplex type buildings. In our prior hearing, we spent a lot of time on the particular zoning ordinances and overlay ordinances that this project is subject to. I don't plan to go through that again tonight unless the board has questions about it. There has been a lot of questions, a lot of dialogue, though, as you see from the public comment about the heights of our buildings or the types of roofs that are going to be used in this project. There's questions about elevations, and again, I don't believe that's 100% relevant to what our request is this evening. The request tonight is very narrow. It's whether there's going to be commercial or residential uses on the ground floor. That is the primary request. So with that background, I'd like to go through the zoning criteria and then happy to answer any questions you may have. First, granting the variance will not be contrary to the spirit and intent of the ordinance nor contrary to the public interest. In this case, the variances, if granted, would not change the essential characteristics of the neighborhood, nor would they threaten any public health, safety, or welfare. This project is located in what I would refer to as a transition zone from larger and taller buildings along Foundry Place and Hill Street to smaller, more traditionally scaled buildings along Hanover and Rock Streets. Approval of the variance is to allow residential uses on the ground floor will not adversely affect or impact the health, safety, and welfare of the public. This area of town is densely populated with residential uses, so our request to eliminate commercial uses is certainly in the public interest. By reducing first floor height of the buildings from 12 feet, it helps us reduce the overall height and massing of the buildings. And lastly, our elevations and streetscapes are not in line with the figure illustrations of 10.5A41.10D, but more appropriate for this area of town. Again, worth noting that this project will go through TAC and Planning Board, so the interests of the public will be adequately protected. Next, substantial justice will be done by granting the variances. And whether or not substantial justice will be done by granting the variances requires the board to conduct a balancing test. If the hardship upon the owner outweighs any benefit to the general public in denying the variances, then substantial justice would be done by granting the variances. We believe substantial justice is done by eliminating the requirement for commercial uses on the ground floor. Commercial uses are not appropriate in this densely residential neighborhood. And if you grant the variances, it will alleviate competition for on-street parking. We also believe that by lowering the first floor height, it will benefit the neighborhood. Again, have buildings that are more consistent with the floor height ceilings that we typically see in the neighborhood. And we think the building types that we're presenting this evening are more in line with the character of the neighborhood. Next, with respect to diminution in value, the key to remember in that denying the variance does not kill this project. It just brings commercial uses onto the first floor of the project. So the question you have to ask yourself tonight is whether commercial uses or residential uses impact property values. We think the answer is clear. Having residential uses with shorter floor height ceilings and streetscapes similar to what we've submitted in our plans are much better for property values in the neighborhood. We believe that it'll cause less traffic, less parking challenges, and just overall better uses of this space for the neighborhood. So we think diminution in value is improved by having residential uses versus commercial uses. Next, with respect to hardship, we have two historic structures on the property that date back to the late 19th century. The property has legal frontage on Hanover Street, but it also fronts along Foundry Place and Rock Street, wherever the city owns that thin strip of land that we saw this afternoon, consisting of approximately 7,300 square feet, located between the property and the city's right-of-way for Foundry Place and Rock Street. This property also has an 8-foot grade change from Foundry Place to Hill Street. Additionally, the existing historic building is located behind a 56-space surface parking lot more than 100 feet from Hanover Street. By allowing residential uses on the first floor, the project is substantially improved and more consistent with the surrounding neighborhood context. The use here is also reasonable The immediate surrounding area, it's all residential uses. So we think having residential uses on the first floor is also reasonable and preferred, as opposed to what could be built by right on the site. Lastly, there's no fair and substantial relationship between the purpose of the ordinance as it's applied to this particular property. The requirement for commercial uses with 12-foot ceiling height makes zero sense in this neighborhood. And I believe everybody in this room agrees with that statement. Unfortunately, this neighborhood, like many neighborhoods in the city, don't like to see change, and I respect that. But we're not here tonight to talk about whether the roof should be mansard or what the elevations of these buildings are. We're simply here tonight to determine if this project is going to have commercial uses or residential uses on the ground floor. It's really a pretty simple ask. This project is going forward one way or another. Our request for residential uses is what we prefer, but we can live with commercial uses. We've done our absolute best to design a project that we think fits in this neighborhood and helps address the concerns, maybe not all of them, but we hope it addresses a lot of concerns for the neighborhood. Because we think this is actually a beautiful project, and particularly compared to what you see being built, not only around our town, but in other towns. I think this is a really classy project, and I think our elevations and our drawings that we submitted show that. But no matter what gets approved, ultimately, there's going to be people that aren't happy about it. I hope tonight the focus could simply be on residential versus commercial. City's in the middle of a housing this city is in the middle of a housing crisis. This property is zoned by right for a project that's consistent with the density that we're proposing. That's really all we have this evening. Happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Attorney Bozen. Any questions for Attorney Bozen? Mr. Neese?
Yeah, I have a number of questions.
You can ask them all at once.
Okay. I'd like to thank the applicant for giving us what we asked for to some extent, in that we asked for a clean package, because things were getting confusing with the different submissions that we had seen over the multiple meetings. So some of my questions, however, relate to things that are not in this package, and I just want to make sure I understand what's going on. So does this project still include a subdivision into two lots, what used to be called, I can't remember, it was Lot A and B or Lot 1 and 2?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. I'm a little confused. Over the course of the meetings, we've seen a lot of different numbers on the number of apartments. And I'm a little confused now how we're seeing a range of apartments from 42 to 48, I believe, is the range. Could you elaborate a little bit on what sort of ideas you're considering at the higher number? I think the floor plans we have, if I'm not incorrect, show 42 units. And I'm just curious, you must have something in mind if you think that you're going to go up another 6 potentially.
I'm going to let the owner address that, Mr. Neese. Shane Forsley.
Good evening, Shane Forsley with 361 Hanover Street. To answer your question, 2 of the buildings have a set number of units, Building B and Building C, as well as Building D. Now, Building A, in its current layout, is subject to minor changes based on the floor plates for the building. So in the instance that unit layouts should change, we know that we have 71 spaces which would support a maximum of 42 units. Now, should we want to bring that down, increase the unit size slightly of some of those units, we know that we have enough parking to support it.
Could you repeat that? It seemed like you said 2 conflicting things, but maybe I didn't hear it correctly. You said 71 spaces are needed for the 42 units, but if you go to 48, you still have enough spaces? Maybe I misheard.
So our site supports, let me just jump to the chart here for you. If you reference Exhibit A, it'll outline the range of units for you. Let me see. So in the higher unit count, we have 71 available parking spaces on site. Should we increase the size of any of those units, it would drop the unit count down in Building A.
So I misheard. It's the reverse. Okay. So to be clear, what you're talking about, if you change the number of units from 42 to 48, you're talking about changing the size of the units in Building A, potentially, and not considering adding another floor to Building A or something like that by resurrecting the CUP plan or anything else?
That is correct.
Thank you. I got to, give me a second here. So the proposal says there's 71 parking places. The traffic study that we were given before said that there were 60 parking spaces in the proposal that was reviewed in the traffic study back in September. Is there somewhere that shows that the conclusions of that study are still valid with the increased number of parking spaces?
We only have a parking study based on the original plan that they had ran it on.
Right. But we're sort of relying on that parking study as indication that there's no safety or traffic hazard being caused by that project. That parking study was based on 60 spaces, is what it says on page 2 of that study, and you now have 71 parking spaces, which in my mind says that there's now more cars than there were when the parking study, potentially, than there were when the parking study was completed. So I'm just looking for some sort of engineering evaluation that says the results of that study are still valid.
We'll most likely have to update the parking study as part of our TAC approval, because we,
You may recall we asked for the existing parking study, but it appears that existing parking study may not be valid now.
well, parking and traffic is not an issue before the zoning board. I understand what you asked for, and we provided the board with our traffic study. That traffic study is going to have to be updated when we submit this to TAC. John may have some additional information you can add to that.
Yep, thank you. John Shagnon from Haley Ward. So we submitted the memorandum from the traffic engineer from Vaness and Associates, Mr. Jeffrey Dirk. And this identified trip generation. How many trips, how many car trips are coming and going from the facility? It wasn't a parking study, it was a trip generation study and adjacent traffic network. And reading from page 10, project generated traffic, the proposal was based on construction of a 51-unit multifamily residential housing development. So it's actually was based on more units than what we're proposing now.
Even though there was less parking considered in the study.
That's correct. And you got to understand, in the city of Portsmouth, parking and the number of, parking is based on unit size,
Right.
which has a sliding scale.
Yes.
And so there very well could be a case where more units of a small size require less parking under the ordinance, okay? So this study, though, talked about trip generation and how much traffic would be in the neighborhood based on, with the study, 51 units. So going forward, there's going to be less traffic proportionally. Does that answer the question?
I think you've answered my question. I'm not sure I agree with your conclusion at the end. I noticed that the floor plan on page 93 shows 42 spaces in Building A, but the summary on page 87 says 45. Which is it?
I don't have the same page numbers that you do, but, I think I know that the numbers that were given as the totals were carefully scrutinized. So if there's an exhibit that has a variant, then we apologize for that. But the totals were carefully scrutinized.
Okay, moving off of parking, on page 65 of the packet, you show heights of adjacent buildings, and you compare them to the heights of your project. But it does seem like there's a little bit of a difference here in that the heights of the adjacent buildings are shown to the peak, whereas the heights of your buildings are shown as, I'm not quite sure what the right height is, I'm going to call it the zoning ordinance height. So it seems like there's a little, as one of the commenters put it, little apples to oranges comparison going on here. I mean, how do you address that?
So if I may speak to your last question first,
Yeah.
regarding the parking. So for Building A, that would be 42 spaces on the interior, as it's shown on the floor plans, plus 3 spaces on the exterior.
Okay.
In respect to your building height question, our measurements were taken to the peak without calculating the true midpoint. Now, that would be a very arduous and difficult exercise to report to you, and so instead of getting you a midpoint measurement on all these buildings, what we did is we went around the perimeter of the known buildings, some of them having flat roofs, such as 349 Hanover Street, 89 Foundry Place, 39-foot high building at 349, a 50-foot high building at 89 Foundry Place, plus the appurtenant structures, and then shot the peaks of some of those other properties. The Pearl being 47 feet to the peak, plus a steeple, plus or minus 12 feet. If we really wanted to get scientific as to how high those are, I'm sure we could, but in reference to our building peaks, which are shown in Exhibit B, I think we can compare.
Okay, so just to be clear, we should be comparing peaks to peaks here, then. The peaks of those buildings to the peaks of your building.
The peaks are all shown on our building, so
Right.
if you wanted to reference where the peak is on our building versus the peak on another, could be considered.
Okay, I was a little confused on page 66 of our packet. I think it's page 66. If you look at the last paragraph, the third sentence, I'm confused because I don't think this is what you're requesting. It says approval of the variance to allow for ground floor commercial use of the buildings will not adversely impact the health, safety, and welfare of the public. That has me baffled because you're not asking for ground floor commercial uses, are you?
We're asking for a variance from the requirement to put commercial uses of the ground floor.
Yeah, that's not what this sentence says, though. The
Could be-
sentence says approval of the variance to allow for ground floor commercial use of the buildings will not adversely impact the health, safety, and welfare of the public.
It must be a typo.
Okay, I just want to make sure
Yeah,
that that's on
I'd
the
make
record.
it very clear for the record, we're not seeking any commercial use on the ground floor.
Okay. So with related to the height of the buildings, I'm looking at some of the renderings from Building D. And Building D, of course, if it's a hip roof mansard roof, it has one height. If it's a flat roof mansard roof, it has a different height. And I'm struggling a little bit here because some of the renderings make it difficult to tell what that is. For example, if you look at page 76, which is the streetscape, I mean, I'm having a difficult time. Can you, these are actually hip roof mansard roofs? That last one, like, if you go back one. I'm not sure that was Building D, but I was having, this is a hip roof mansard roof, right? It comes to peak from both sides. It doesn't have a flat of any type on the top. Is that correct? As described in the ordinance?
This is a hip-top mansard roof, and it qualifies as a hip-top mansard because less than 50% of the roof area is flat.
Okay. Is that in the ordinance?
Yes.
Okay. Could you just, all right, I'll find it. Thanks. That's all my questions.
Any questions? Does anybody else have any questions for the applicant? Ms. Ricker? Mr. Madison? Hey, just a couple questions from myself. So, going back to the very fraught thing of the unit calculation, in your narrative, let me see if I can find it. You say that it is 26 to 34 for Building A. However, when I look at the floor plans, the suggested floor plans, it actually is 24 in Building A. So can you just describe the discrepancy? I realize that there's a sliding scale there, and you're proposing to go to build no more than 48. However, there is a discrepancy between the narrative and the floor plan. Because I count 8 on each floor, second, third, fourth floor.
Should the variance be granted, there are 2 units on the first floor as well.
Okay.
And then, as shown on the floor plans, there are 8 per floor. However, as I noted earlier, we have the parking to support up to 42, excuse me, 32 units in Building A. And so this provides a floor plate with emergency access, egress, flow corridors, all of that would support those unit counts.
Okay. All righty. I think the next question is for Attorney Bozen. So the variance request is the 10.5. Is that for, I would have thought that was for the existing Heinemann building because that's already been built as a commercial building. Is that also applicable for B, C, and D?
Yes.
Okay. And the row house, duplex, and apartment variance requests are being requested because obviously in CD5, you wouldn't have those kind of building types because commercial is required on the ground floor.
Correct.
That's correct. Okay. And I just want to go back to the easement issue. I think Attorney Lyons is here, actually. I will ask him that question. I don't have any further questions, Mr. Mattson?
Yeah, you just reminded me of a question. So the duplexes, townhouses, or row houses, what is allowed are actually of a higher intensity development because, so this is the question, because commercial is required on the first floor, and also because of the character district it's in, the alternative buildings are actually bigger building types.
Correct. This is really all a byproduct of not having ground floor commercial.
Okay.
Okay. Mr. Neese?
Yeah, I don't mean to be pedantic, but could I get the reference to that describes the hip-top mansard roof provision where it's less than 50% of the top? It's
I don't have the ordinance with me.
Be in the character district. Character district. Find it. Doesn't look as
I think it's in the character. I think it's in the character district. Just for the record, I don't see the relevancy of the question, but I respect that you want an answer to it.
You're looking for the building height requirement?
No.
in that zone?
No, I'm looking for the description of a hip-top mansard roof where it says that if the flat area of the mansard roof is less than 50% of the top floor, it still counts as a hip-top mansard roof. I think that's what was described, and I can't find that in the ordinance anywhere.
Did
That's
you
why
look
I'm
in the
asking.
I was
definitions
just thinking it could be the
section?
definitions.
Yes, I am
Yeah.
looking in the definitions
You are,
section.
okay.
That's
sorry.
why I'm asking,
Yeah,
because
yeah,
I can't find it.
understand. Yeah, I'm not
Yeah.
the architect, but I know that there is buried in there the ways to do that. So, you know, in the definitions somewhere,
It's,
you know.
there's,
This, one person at a time, this is a question of the applicant.
Maybe somebody can.
Yeah, the
legislate.
applicant's unable to point to the specific section of the ordinance. Maybe Jillian knows.
Yeah, it's in the definitions,
That's
but
what I
I've
thought.
got to find which one.
so there's a definition which talks about a penthouse being 50% of the, and not applying, not counting as a floor because it's only 50% of the top floor. But I haven't been able to find one that says the flat area of a hip-top mansard roof, if it's less than 50% of the top floor, it counts as a hip-top mansard roof, which a hip-top mansard roof doesn't count as a story. The
I think that's a question that should be asked and answered before the planning board.
I guess, Jillian, an alternative way of asking is if the planning department staff reviewed the, this mansard hip roof condition and determined that no variance was needed for.
Yes, when we reviewed the architectural elevations, it was determined to be a hip-top mansard roof.
Okay.
So if we found that it were to be different and not meet the definition, we would take a look at that and decide whether they still met that
Okay.
condition.
Mr. Neese?
I'm a little confused. Is that something that happens after the ZBA? Are there or have you already seen architectural drawings?
At this point, we're basing it on the architectural drawings that we have in this application.
As we go through site review, those drawings are going to get more defined.
Based on these architectural elevations, we have considered it a hip-top mansard roof.
Okay.
We have a definition.
So in a two-step process here, so first referring to mansard roof, I don't have the page, but in the definitions, mansard roof is defined as, in Article 15, a four-sided flat or hip-top roof characterized by two slopes on each of its sides with the lower slope punctured by dormer windows. The upper slope of the roof may not be visible from the street level when viewed from close to the building. And then jumping ahead to flat roof. A roof with a slope of less than 1 to 4 for more than 50% of the roof area.
Mr. Neese?
So what I'm struggling with here is, let me back up. The reason why I'm struggling with is the question of building height and whether a variance is needed for the building height. If it's a hip-top mansard roof, clearly there's no variance needed for building height. I'm not disputing that. Questions have been raised by the public about whether it's really a hip-top mansard roof, and when I look at these drawings, I can't tell if it's a hip-top mansard roof or not. The definition of hip-top mansard roof has a phrase that perhaps is not in the section that you read, where it says the upper slope of the roof may not be visible from street level when viewed from close to the building, and the highest roof structure shall not be a flat roof as defined herein. Nowhere have I found anything that says if 50% of that can be flat, that it can have a flat surface, and as long as that flat surface is less than 50% of the top floor, it still counts as a hip-top mansard roof. So this is why I'm asking the question, because the question is related to whether a variance should be being requested for this structure. Because once we approve this, it goes forward as presented. I can't tell from the pictures. This is why I asked the question. Your response confused me because you said it's got a flat top, but that flat top is 50% of the area of the top floor, so it still counts as a hip-top mansard roof. I'm willing to accept that if we can find a reference for it, but I can't find a reference for it.
I think that Jillian may have some information that's relevant.
I think the second part of what Shane had just described is what's relevant here, in that flat roof is defined as a roof with a slope of less than 1 to 4 for more than 50% of the roof area. And that is in the definitions under F for flat roof.
And because less than 50% of this upper roof portion is flat, it's not considered a flat roof. It's considered part of the mansard upper roof.
As defined herein, yes.
Okay.
And that is consistent with your review of the application when it came into the planning
Yes.
department. And you determined that it does not need a variance.
Correct.
Okay. Any additional questions? Okay, thank you very much. So we will hear now from those who are for the application. And if anyone would like to speak and stand up in favor of the application. And please state your name and where you live for the record, please.
My name is Elizabeth Bratter, property owner, 159 McDonough Street. Just for the record, I'd like to clarify that length, by my definition, is how it goes along the street, and width, by my definition, is from the street backwards. This application is still filled with errors and misrepresentations. The disregard of this board and the neighborhood is apparent by the choice not to correct previous errors, not present everything requested by the board, and not incorporating any suggestions presented by the 15 to 20 neighbors at the neighborhood meeting. Presented is a cherry-picked version of the downtown overlay district, from which everything is removed except for the parking advantages. Feel free to approve all of these variants. Just remove the entire downtown overlay district. Doing that would result in residential on the first floor, removal of commercial requirements. The ground floor building height of 10.5 could be a stipulation of the removal of the downtown overlay district, or is it 10.6 like it says in the application? The only variance left would be the building types, which are dictated by CD5 zoning. These could be approved with very specific stipulations on each building type. That is the only way I support this. There are only 2 row houses in the entire neighborhood, and they were built in 1832. One is across the street from Safeway Storage, we call it the old shoe factory, and the other one is 63 feet long, and it fronts on McDonough Street across from a 34-foot long family home. The proposed row house style of Building B could be approved with stipulations. It must have the roof style it currently has and the current height as presented, and cannot be any longer than 60 feet. Because Rock Street is about half the width of McDonough Street, and Building B is across from a 32-foot wide family home. That's not their front, that's the side of their house. The duplex, Building C, could be approved as it is, but it too should include stipulations that the roof style, the front length, and the height cannot be changed. The apartment building, which is Building D, like other apartment buildings in the neighborhood, could be no longer than 40 feet. It could have no mansard roof because that is not what is in that neighborhood. It directly abuts the neighborhood, and its length is highly inconsistent. Even longer lots have 10-foot lengths of open spaces, and their building lengths are not longer than 40 feet. This lack of reasonable spacing and length between structures gives a massive infill look. It was stated at the last meeting, the development, and at this one now that I think about it, development will not be pursuing the penthouse or the North End Incentive Overlay District privileges. This could be in the records. Currently, the record only states they do not desire to pursue the penthouse. Using the North End Incentive Overlay District could add another story, making the structure even taller, because currently with the mansard roof that's on there and the 8 feet of grade that you noticed this afternoon while you were walking around back there, it will be taller than the garage now. If you add another story, it will be totally immense. So it could not be approved unless those stipulations are put on there. It could be helpful to make some recommendations on items of concern which have been brought up by neighbors as well as by members of this board for TAC to evaluate more closely, such as traffic, sight lines, building heights, and grade misrepresentations. Thank you for your time. The only way this should be approved is very specific stipulations to protect the neighborhood and to protect over-infill of this lot. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who would like to speak to, for, or against this application? Could you please represent yourself for the record?
Attorney John Lyons, and I represent Hill Hanover Group, LLC, that owns the 3 properties on tax map 125, lot 14, address 317 through 339 Hanover Street, that abuts Hill Street in the back. I've presented in front of you now several times, so I won't put you through the torture of repeating what I've said each time. For the record, however, I've also submitted a letter, Madam Chair, setting out specifically the basis of my client's objection and the reason why, from our perspective, the applicant has failed to meet all the criteria to satisfy their request for a variance, specifically whether it's 42 units or 48 units, access down the right-of-way of Hill Street certainly would have a negative impact, significant negative impact on the value of my client's properties. We know there'll be parking in that area as well, so we object for all of the reasons set out in my letter of June 14th, Valentine's Day. I don't know if there was a question by the chair.
Yes, I just want to see, does anybody else have a question for Attorney Lyons? Mr. Manson? Yes, so in your submission to us, I have a couple questions. Hill Street is a private right-of-way from Autumn Street onward, correct?
Correct.
And is Hill Street two-way? Or is
It can be
one-way?
used two-way,
It can
yes,
be,
yes.
but I think the easement extends through the parking lot of 361 Hanover, and it egresses onto Hanover Street, correct?
Right. I provided you at the end a copy of the site plan when the Kearsarge Mill condominium was created, and Kimball Chase specifically notes that an easement is granted to my client, Hanover Group LLC, through the parking lot to Hanover Street. That easement, as depicted on that plan, actually runs right through the middle of what is described as Building D. That's another issue not before this board. I certainly hope that there perhaps might be a way to resolve that. We don't have any issue coming down between buildings B and C, but we're going to protect that easement.
And we noticed today on our site walk that there is private parking on Hill Street, correct?
The parking that you saw on Hill Street belongs to my client's buildings. Those are tenants that have those parking spots assigned to them, which are permitted to be granted by my client, who owns the right to use that right-of-way.
Okay, and so they are attached to the individual units, obviously.
Those are tenants in the 3 buildings owned by my client.
Okay, and the value of the rent, these are rentals?
They are.
The value of the rental includes that property in the back? The parking?
Certainly does. You know what a premium parking is in the city of Portsmouth.
Okay. Does the city maintain the private right-of-way, or how is snow cleared and whatnot?
Combination, the city does come down through there, but my client also provides some maintenance in the area.
Okay. And prior to the blockage into the parking lot, which I encountered today when I was trying to go through, your client's tenants would use that ingress into the parking lot to exit out onto Hanover Street.
Yeah, these properties were owned by attorney Jerry Tobby, Judge Tobby, whom some of you may know, and we can show that through adverse possession, in addition to what's in the deeds and the plans, that the tenants and occupants of those 3 buildings, in a continuous, open, exclusive, and notorious fashion, have used that right-of-way down through the parking lot in the Kearsarge Mill building, which is one of the reasons why certainly Kimball Chase and the site plan documented that right-of-way.
Okay. So, but what you're saying is that you believe that your clients can work out that easement issue through the parking lot that would run under Building D, correct?
Well, it takes two to work out any agreement. I would hope that would be the case. Attorney Bozen knows that following whatever you decide to do today, I'm filing suit to protect that easement. I'm going to represent that to the planning board when we get there, but I'm hopeful that we'll be able to resolve the location of where the easement is through what was the former parking lot.
And that would be to go in front of Building A and then go between Buildings C and D, I believe.
That's,
no,
B and C. B and C.
In order to egress then out onto Hanover.
Correct, because the current easement runs along the right-hand side of the parking lot where Building D is going to be located. If you look, I've attached a copy of that a site plan when the condominium was created that shows the current location of that easement.
Okay. Thank you. I have no more for Mr. Metzger.
Yeah, I guess, so because the applicant could build something quite similar to this without any variances, how would denying these variance requests solve your problem?
Well, I want to bifurcate the issue of the easement. Let's assume that we did not have an easement through the parking lot. All we had was the private easement to the end of Hill Street. My client's objection to this variance stands because there's an indication in prior applications to you. In fact, I provided you with the page that Hill Street would be used for ingress and egress. So whether I have a legal right to claim I got an easement through the parking lot, using Hill Street with my client parking on it, with its narrow nature, with the amount of cars that will go down through there, will negatively impact the value of my client's project. And that is the legal basis for our objection to the variance. Of course, I indicated in my objection that there's a way to potentially solve that too, and that is to condition any approval to prevent ingress and egress through Hill Street. Did I answer your question?
I guess mostly with that last little bit there is basically you would like a stipulation, and so also just to get your position on the record is also part of this, because you didn't specifically answer how because they can still develop this parcel, us denying these variances doesn't doesn't solve the egress problem.
That's true, and of course my client likes the fact that the request is not to have commercial on the first floor. That ultimately benefits my clients with what they want to do with the property also. Our direct objection for your purposes to the variance is the use of Hill Street for ingress and egress, and how that negatively impacts the value of my client's properties, whether it's parking, whether it's the amount of traffic going through. So if the variance were granted with the condition that Hill Street could not be used for ingress and egress, that would satisfy our concerns. Then it's up to me on my client's behalf to protect the balance of the variance that we claim runs through the parking lot, perhaps working out an agreement with my friend Attorney Bozen.
I see. Okay. Thank you.
Any questions for Attorney Lyons? Okay. Thank you, Attorney.
Thank you.
Lyons. Anybody else? Attorney Bozen, if you could just wait 1 second. I just want to give first-time speakers an opportunity. Is there anyone else who would like to speak to, for, or against this application?
Nicole Lapierre, Direct Abutter, 44 Rock Street. Just trying to stand on my tippy toes. I don't feel any better about this application than I did the 2 previous times we already played this game because nothing's really changed and the application still appears to have a lot of holes in it. I don't feel good either about the foul play with the zoning. That remains completely egregious to me. And I also don't feel good about the clouded threat that has been over this process since the beginning. And I have bit my tongue, I will no longer. They proposed, with the help of a former city employee, Plan A. Plan A was a disgusting monolithic building. Everyone went, oh, that's terrible, including the builder is now calling it monolithic and ugly. And the whole time, what has been over our head is, if you don't like A, you're getting B. I don't think they had any intentions, and this is my words and my allegation, and I have no way to prove this. They have no intentions of building A, but how convenient that they had someone who was a former city employee help them come up with this plan where there was always this threat. Well, if you don't like beautiful B, you're getting A. What is that? How is that? It's gross. To me, it's gross, and I'm sick of it. And I don't understand how their application's gotten any better. I also, as just a layperson, as a regular citizen, I don't understand when I stood in front of that property today. If you stand in front of the old Heinemann building to the left, the strip of land is city land. The back parking lot behind Heinemann that they want to use, that's city land. That is taxpayers' land. And on the right is Hill Street, which is in some kind of litigation. So literally 3/4 of the land that surrounds the building, right up to the building, is not theirs. I don't as a layperson and as a taxpayer, I don't get how this project has even gotten that far. And the biggest takeaway I had this afternoon from that site walk was when my neighbor Kate said to me that you cannot separate density and safety. You know, she makes a really great point because that affects the character of a neighborhood. And so when you add all these cars, 40 to 48 units, we still don't know how many units, that's still not nailed down. That's almost 96 cars. What does that do to Rock Street? Rock Street is more narrow than Hill Street. And if you looked down Rock or Pearl or even Hanover today, I don't see it. I don't see it going well. And if that's a tax issue, then it's a tax issue. But how that doesn't affect the character of our neighborhood and our home values when I live on a quiet street and I won't anymore, tell me how that's not going to affect my property value, please, someone. I'm done. I give up.
Is there anyone else here who would like to speak to, for, or against? And could you please identify yourself for the record? Thank you.
Hello, I'm the aforementioned neighbor, Kate. Catherine Waldwick. I am the owner of 30 Parker Street. I have lived on 30 Parker Street for nearly 4 years now. I live there with my husband. Well, it's currently being renovated, so we're in a rental, but we are the property owners there and plan to return back there. I live there with my husband, and I also am representing my 2-year-old son, Arthur, and my 3-month-old son, Reed, when I'm speaking here tonight. And in terms of what I'm asking you for, I'm not actually sure what I should be asking you for. And the reason I'm not sure is because, as Nicole mentioned, it's a little bit of a, I'm not sure if I'm allowed to curse at a city meeting, but a damned if you do, damned if you don't situation that we have found ourselves in as a neighborhood. And I'm someone who, as a millennial, I understand that Portsmouth has really, really hard demands, and our generation has gotten really short end of the stick when it comes to housing. I am really, really sympathetic to that. And I am also sympathetic to the fact that the character of a city is what keeps it alive, and there is a constant song and dance between the two of them, and you are constantly trying to strike the right balance for how do you help a city grow while also maintaining what makes it so special. And so I remain optimistic that this lot can be developed in a way that is also in accordance with the character of our neighborhood. I do not think these things are mutually exclusive, but both plans the applicant has put forward, both the plan under discussion tonight as well as the vested plan, neither of them meet that goal of bringing our city forward in a way that honors its character. So I first want to talk about why we chose Islington Creek when my husband and I were settling down We wanted to pick our forever home, and we wanted a place where we could safely raise children. And I did not want an overly dense urban setting when picking where I would raise my kids. Islington Creek is quiet, safe, and residential, and it's one of the things I really love about it. It's even near a playground, Rock Street Playground, which is across Rock Street from the development in which we walked through today. We are now blessed with 2 little boys, as I mentioned, Arthur and Reed, and I take them there all the time to that playground. And everything I'm going to be saying to you tonight, I view through the lens of what neighborhood am I leaving for them and other future residents of Portsmouth, because it's not actually about me, it's about what legacy am I leaving behind for them. Safety is my top concern, and while I know safety is usually in the realm of TAC, as Nicole mentioned, we believe safety is character. Safety affects how one can utilize the space around them. Can I send my boys to go bike to the park, or can I not? Density affects safety, which affects character. You cannot disentangle them. Granting variances that allow residential on the first floor that actually leads to a higher number of units than the as of right plan absolutely increases how dangerous this design is for the neighborhood. This proposed development will bring in at least 80 to 96 cars. Most units, even when it's a 1-bedroom, a lot of times it's a couple living there, and they often have 2 cars. Onto tiny side streets like Rock Street, Hanover, Pearl, and Parker. These are streets we walk around all the time and leverage when we take our boys to the playground, go on walks as a family, and even just step out our front door. I'm constantly witnessing cars whizzing around, circling like lunatics trying to find parking. People are distracted when they're trying to find parking. It's really quite dangerous because people are just trying to outgun each other to get to the open spot. So I find it disconcerting that no accurate traffic study has been done for this actual design. Only one study was done, and it had the wrong entrance, incorrectly assumes usage of Foundry Place, and isn't even for this proposed design. There's major errors in basic things like street widths on it. We have brought up safety as our top concern time and time again, first to the planning board back in May, and then in every single ZBA letter since then. The developer could not be bothered to conduct a traffic study that actually addresses this very legitimate need, and while also trying to bring in density that is grossly out of character with this neighborhood. To me, I view this as a life or death situation. All it takes is one car, one distracted driver whipping around a corner, pulling out of a blind intersection, coming out of that building without visibility, to hit one of the kids as they ride their bikes to Rock Street Playground. To me, it is not only disconcerting, as I still have no way of knowing if this increased density is even safe, it is also deeply disrespectful to all of us. It is disrespectful to us as citizens for not having a very basic request to assess safety taken seriously. It is disrespectful to you, the ZBA, for asking you to approve variances for designs we have no idea are safe, and for which there was a request for a traffic study that is not even included in this February application. I might seem angry, and I would be lying to you if I said I wasn't. But I want you to know none of this anger is directed at you, the ZBA. You've been thoughtful and diligent in reviewing the information provided. You are doing a very hard job of trying to consider all sides, arguments, gather facts, and remain dispassionate while doing what is best for the city. For that, I am incredibly grateful. But I'm mad at how we got to this point. I'm angry that I've spent considerable time since last May reviewing every single application this developer has put in front of the city, taken time to provide meaningful feedback on how we could foster development that doesn't jeopardize safety and character, and it has been routinely ignored. Every single letter my husband and I have submitted has conditions and suggestions on it for each grievance we have. I believe in being a solutions-oriented person and not just complaining, and I have offered solutions in every single letter. My son Reed was born Monday, November 18th. I am angry that I had to spend the Sunday before I went into labor digging through an application from this applicant, missing common sense information like the number of units and basic renderings so I could submit public comment. I'm angry that this is now the 3rd application I've had to glean through for this development. I have yet to find one that does not have sloppy, egregious errors. Would I ever get 3 chances as a private citizen to keep updating my application instead of just having the application rejected? I'm angry that this design wants to cherry pick zoning and essentially use variances to rezone a lot. It wants the density perks of CD5 and the downtown overlay, while also asking for all the perks of CD4L1 and GRC that it is surrounded by. I'm angry that we got to the point that it was zoned as CD5, but some of my other neighbors have talked about that in depth, and I won't and I won't discuss that. And then lastly, I'm mad that this is an as-of-right plan has been given to us as an or else to hang over our heads throughout this entire variance process. Give me these variances, or else I'm going to build a large gray box with a tunnel. Why else has it been included in several of the past applications, even though the design requires no variances, if not to incite fear of rejecting the variance requests? I have had a long time to sit with my anger on this, and sometimes the universe shows you something at the exact moment you need to see it. I was listening to a podcast the other day, and the host quoted C.S. Lewis, who said, "I sat with my anger long enough until she told me her real name was grief." And what I'm really feeling is grief. We have so much to lose. We chose Portsmouth because of its unique historic character and it being the best of both worlds by being close to downtown, yet a world away. We are so blessed to live in this neighborhood. It is quiet, safe, and historic. You have heard my husband say this to you before, but we think of ourselves as stewards of this neighborhood's rich history. We knew moving here that moving to a city as historic as Portsmouth, that we were inheriting a rich legacy. We take that responsibility very seriously to uphold that rich tradition that precedes us and to leave Portsmouth better than we found it for the next generation after us.
Excuse me, we have 5 minutes for comments, so you can save the rest of your comments, but we need to give other people time.
Thank you, sorry.
Okay. So would you like to continue your comments later?
Yes, the last thing I will just add is that we know the ZBA uses past precedent for other designs on the street, and we believe this will set off a ricochet effect throughout the neighborhood. I'm happy to speak more about that later as well.
Okay, thank you. Is there anyone else who would like to speak to, for, or against? And please remember that we have a 5-minute limit. Could you please identify yourself?
Good evening. I'm Marcy Vaughn, property owner at 407 Hanover.
Thank you.
Here we are again. Thanks for taking the time to pay such thoughtful attention to this. I really appreciate it. So it's been widely acknowledged that 361 Hanover is improperly zoned. The neighborhood knows it, city officials have stated it, and the applicant concedes it. And here's what the curious thing to me is that their argument on undue hardship is based on the fact that the zoning is wrong. They write, simply put, commercial uses in this section of the city is not practical and not in keeping with the residential characteristics of the neighborhood. That's on page 3. So, as far as I know, and I'm probably the only lawyer in the room who's not a land use lawyer, but the zoning of a property is not a special characteristic that causes undue hardship. And I agree with my neighbors because we shouldn't be here tonight. We certainly shouldn't be here tonight, and we wouldn't be here tonight if the city had timely complied with a vote from the planning board in January of 2020 to call a public hearing on an amendment to rezone this property. They didn't call that hearing in 2020, or in 2021, or in 2022, or in 2023, or in 2024. And because of that dilatory conduct on behalf of the city, 361 Hanover was able to exploit a procedural nuance to lock that improper zoning in and not take part in a public debate about how to rezone the property. And it was clever. I have to hand that to them. It was very clever because rezoning the property to allow first floor residential, which is not permitted under CD5, if they did that, they would lose the stuff they like about CD5. So if I'm following it, 361 Hanover's undue hardship is that they don't like the portions of the admittedly incorrect zoning, but they don't want to lose the stuff that they do like. And to be clear, they have every right to engage in procedural gamesmanship to maximize their leverage and to threaten our neighborhood. We know how they do business now. But what the really interesting thing for me here is this question: what must the city do under these circumstances to protect the public interest? So my neighbors and I here, like we represent portions of the public interest, but let's be truthful, we also represent our own. The real public interest, the public interest in general, is the silent party in this room. And to protect that public interest, one of the questions you as a zoning board, I suppose, have to ask yourselves is, what if everybody in the same situation, the same circumstances, felt free to do the same thing, to come to us with an application for this? How would that hurt the public interest? Well, what if in every case where the city and the property owner concede that the property is improperly zoned, the property owner locked in that improper zoning through design review, and then they argued that that improper zoning itself was an undue hardship so that they could get a variance from the portions of that improper zoning that they don't like, but benefit from the parts that they do like? I think that's a self-inflicted hardship, frankly. And I can tell you what would happen. I can tell you what would happen if that becomes the norm. What that will do is that will undermine the integrity of our city's ordinances. The public has an interest in knowing that the city will implement zoning that is consistent with the authority that the state permits. That's a grant of authority, and you have to comply with the statute. State law, as far as I know, doesn't authorize the city to run a zoning buffet where it inures to the benefit of a private interest and leaves the public in the dark about what the real rules are. I don't think that's what the law allows. That takes me to my last point for now, which is actually in response to the applicant's characterization of our neighborhood as not liking change. That's not the case. All of us would be happy to see that lot developed in a thoughtful and genuine way that is consistent with the character of our neighborhood. What we don't like is the track record of the city not paying attention to the best interest of the public in our neighborhood. And I don't speak to members of this board. You've been incredibly thoughtful. But it's not just about that 4-year delay in scheduling that meeting that put us here in the first place, that delay that has me now standing before you basically arguing against my interest no matter what I say. Because there's also the fact that the city never told us that in our neighborhood, the public was entitled to 18 free parking spaces for 18 years, which is pretty remarkable given the public drama around parking in our neighborhood. And then there's this thing that still confuses me. The city's decision to accept the design review in the first place, when there was a serious question on the table about whether the existing conditions were actually accurate or whether there was an impediment that existed that meant that excavation would violate state law. So, to be clear, in saying those things, these 3 really peculiar things...
Excuse me, I'm sorry, you're 5 minutes. Could you please finish up your comments later after others had a chance to speak?
Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who would like to speak to, for, or against this application? Who it is? Okay. Is there anyone here from the public who would like to speak to, for, or against? We have somebody on Zoom. Robin Husledge. Robin, are you there? Could you please identify yourself for the record?
Yes. Good evening, Board of Adjustment members. I'm Robin Husledge, and I live at 27 Rock Street and a butter of the 361 Hanover Street property. Overall, I'm supportive of the current proposed development given the incorrect CD5 zoning mentioned by my neighbors. I ask that if you do decide to approve the requested variances, that the requests for the variances meets the 5 criteria to justify your approval, that you add conditions or stipulations, whatever the term is, as follows. Replace the mansard roofs on buildings A and D with roof types in keeping with the neighborhood. Gable, salt box, or flat. There's, a variety. Primarily, our roof types are gable. This property is in the Character District 5, so it should fit the character of the neighborhood. And any new development should blend in, with the character of the neighborhood. Buildings A and D have mansard roofs, which are not found in our neighborhood, whose homes predominantly have the gable, salt box, and flat roofs. Mansard roofs are out of character with our neighborhood and should not be permitted in this development. The second request is, or criteria that I'd like applied, is to increase the modulation of the row house so that it does not appear to be an 82-foot long monolithic building, which it looks like right now. Either step back between the different townhouses to give it, some character, some definition, so that it's not just a big gray box. I still have significant concerns regarding the massing and heights of the buildings. Building D in particular, which all of the buildings, will dwarf all of the abutting buildings. The included picture of and call out of several of the surrounding buildings to this property were missing a boatload of heights of the different houses, and we measured those heights, and I included that in my letter. All of the missing properties, all of which are significantly shorter than all the buildings that are being proposed. So I think that is very important information to have when you're looking at the comparison and how this new development will fit within our neighborhood. Thank you for your consideration of my requests for the addition of conditions should you approve the requested variances for this proposed development tonight. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Is there anyone else? Could you please come to the podium?
Elizabeth Bratter, property owner, 159 McDonough Street. These are Robin Husiliges. She asked us to pass them out because she wasn't able to actually physically come.
Okay.
Is that okay?
You can hand them to Ms. Recker, and she'll hand them down. Okay, thank you. Is there anyone else here who would like to speak to, for, or against this application? Attorney Bozen?
Madam Chair, members of the board, heard a lot tonight. I understand people are emotional. But a lot of the comments tonight ignore my client's property rights. He has property rights. It's my job to make sure they're protected. And those rights mean that he has the unequivocal right to purchase the property and to develop that property in a manner that's consistent with the ordinance, and requesting variances as part of that process. There's nothing underhanded here. There's nothing disrespectful here. In fact, if there's any disrespect, it's the disrespect to my client's property rights that has to be taken into consideration tonight. The one thing I said last time, and I'm going to say it again tonight, I read all the letters from the abutters. I've heard the comments tonight. The comments pertain to the ordinance itself, to the massing, to the height, to the roof types. All of those issues are issues that should be brought before TAC and Planning Board. The issue tonight is whether we're going to put ground floor commercial or residential, and there's no comment really about that. I could go through each one of these comments in the letters that were submitted, but I don't need to. You've seen them. There's nothing in here about commercial. There's nothing. It's all about massing and traffic and safety. That's all. This is the first step in a long process. The first step is the variance. If we don't get the variance, we go to the Planning Board with what we can develop by right. It's not a threat. It's just it's a reality. It's his property right. So that's the plan. If we can improve the plan with some variances, we're willing to do that. If we can't, we're going to the Planning Board, as he has absolute right to do. And all of those issues will be addressed. I want to address, most importantly, the comments that Attorney Lyons made, because I think that's critical for tonight, because this is an extremely complicated issue that he's raising for this board, and it doesn't belong before this board. But he's asking you to put conditions, which is clever. He's a very clever lawyer, but the property rights here are extremely complicated. His client can't enter through our property without getting onto our land. I've researched this property, this easement right away back to the King's Grant. I can't find any deeded instrument that gives his client the right to come through our property. Now, Attorney Lyons presented this board with a condominium plan which shows right away. Well, that's a condominium plan, not for his client's 3 units, that's for the condo unit, the first building that you see. There's also a site plan, recorded at the registry, site D-34716, that talks about the right that the condo has to access. That can be relocated, and my client has the right to relocate that. So that's why this issue is not before this board. We're not here tonight to litigate that issue. And for Attorney Lyons to ask you to put a condition on that is absolutely wrong, because if we go to the Superior Court and we win this argument, then, yet I'm stuck with a condition that you've put on there that I can't use Hill Street. So he's backdoor to victory or backdoor to defeat for me. I got to have the right to argue that issue fully before the Superior Court. It's not for this board to decide who has the right to use that. That's going to be an issue for another day. Heck, the fire chief may say, I need to come down that road with fire trucks. And you've just hamstringed the fire department by saying nobody can use it. So that's not an issue before this board. I would urge this board not to touch it with a 10-foot pole. Commercial versus residential. That's all I got.
Thank you, Attorney Lyons. Is there anyone else who would like to speak to, for, or against? Second time speakers?
I will say wouldn't be the first time a group of women expressing an opinion were called emotional. And I will also add, if we want to chat commercial here, the commercial design, the as-of-right plan, actually has fewer units than this plan here. So from my angle of safety, that is potentially actually better. And commercial, let's talk about how commercial is doing in Portsmouth. We just went through our residential, our tax evaluations across all of the city. And commercial is overall struggling, and more of the tax burden has moved on to residents. Commercial properties, even in prime locations downtown, are sitting vacant, unable to find tenants, and flagship tenants are bleeding out of Portsmouth. So in some ways, having more commercial property could arguably increase supply of commercial availability, making rents more affordable, so businesses like Stonewall and Life is Good and other major businesses and key restaurants aren't leaving the city. So let's chat about commercial versus residential things. Also commercial versus residential. When we bring up residential, by putting it on the first floor, it increases that density, and that does affect character. So it actually is very directly related, our argument about commercial here. The last thing I will just add is that this is a character district, and even if it's a CD5 character district, that C stands for character. And if this is approved, this plan that we're discussing tonight, you see how Building D looms over Hanover Street. And I know it's technically 3 stories. It's technically 3 stories the way a tomato is technically a fruit, but would you ever put it in a fruit salad, right? Would you ever say a tomato belongs among the fruit aisle at a grocery store, right? No, you would not. That 4th floor, attic, whatever we want to call it, it's going to be having people live there. That's going to live and function like a 4-story building. And what that is going to do is anyone who lives in a historic building along Hanover Street, they're going to have their light blocked. And then what it's going to incentivize is people saying, well, why don't I just knock down my historic building and build something that's taller so my light isn't blocked? And you're going to see it go down the row one by one by one of disincentivizing owning historic homes there and encouraging new development that is grossly out of character with our neighborhood. So I ask of you tonight to make the decision you need to do to protect our neighborhood, to foster development that also honors the character of our neighborhood. Neither of these designs here do that. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other speakers speaking to, for, or against?
Marcy Vaughn, 407 Hanover. So, I regret that Mr. Boson feels that we're ignoring his client's property interests. We're definitely not doing that. It might feel a little sensitive about that, but instead what we're doing is we're challenging the legality of their request. To be very clear, the issue tonight is not a binary between commercial and residential. The issue tonight is the character of our neighborhood, and what can this board do to protect the public interest given the situation that the public has been put in. I am not convinced that commercial would be worse for me than residential, because my deepest concern, as I stated in the letter that we submitted last night and numerous other letters, is density. This development is way too dense for our neighborhood. It's utterly inconsistent with the character of our neighborhood. That row house building, whatever, across the street from my house, it's vastly larger than anything else in the vicinity. This is maxing out what they can possibly do on this property. And one of the original arguments that Mr. Wilson made after presenting the pseudo Plan A and then slipping in Plan B was that commercial would not be viable in this neighborhood. Yeah, that's probably true because it's improperly zoned, and he could have avoided the commercial if he had stepped up to a public debate to engage the public on what the correct zoning was. But he wasn't ready to do that, and that's fine. Commercial might be a better choice here because the density would be lower. Now, if this board does decide to grant these variances tonight, I would ask you to cap the density at 30 units. Density is arbitrary. I don't know what's too dense for a specific neighborhood. I'm telling you that anything more than 30 units is way too dense for my neighborhood. This sense that safety is not important here. Safety is critical here. And the number of people who are driving on our roads are going to have a direct relationship to how safe those roads are. The density of the residential units will have a direct relationship to the character of our neighborhood. So if you cap it at 30, I am all for residential. All of those units, fine, go for it. But if you're stuck on this as a tricky issue, I would urge you to go back and think about what's in the public interest here. As I was saying in my first long-winded discussion here, there have been a number of incidents with respect to this specific property that have given rise to serious questions in my mind and in the mind of other members of the public about what the city is watching. Are you watching the ball here? And to be clear, I'm in no way suggesting that there's any sort of special relationship with 361 Hanover that has caused these three specific incidences that have come to my attention, and I'm not even digging anything up, where the public interest has been ignored. I'm not saying there's a special relationship. What I'm asking is if no one is watching the shop with respect to zoning issues with this property, with respect to licensing issues, with respect to state law compliance, and these issues just fell in our laps like without looking for them, what else is happening in this city? Who's protecting the public interest? That's your job. So if you want to cap this at 30 residential units, I'm all for it. Otherwise, I don't know. I'm glad I'm not in your seats tonight because this is a very difficult issue. I appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other speakers to, for, or against? And for repeat speakers, I would ask that you speak to something new.
Elizabeth Bratter, property owner, 159 McDonough Street. I was just going to remind you of what I suggested, which was the downtown overlay district be removed. It answers all of their questions. Make it 10.5 as a stipulation. Make the building lengths shorter. You can do that as you approve each building. The row house, the duplex can stay the same, and the apartment. If you make their length shorter, you actually impact the density. So that was my 2 cents. Please remember what I told you in the beginning. That's a way to really incorporate all of things and get rid of those mansard roofs. Thank you.
Very brief. I would ask the board to be mindful that not too long ago, this building was occupied by the Heinemann Company. They had over 100 employees coming and going every single day, whether it was down Hill Street, whether it was down through the neighborhood. Those people came and went every single day for years. So what we're proposing is much less than what has pre-existed on that land. Thank you.
Thank you.
I will happily speak to that as a direct abutter. Heinemann was a wonderful neighbor. They came, they parked the same time every day, filled the lot. They left at the same time every day. It was not a constant flow of traffic. And every weekend, our neighborhood was incredibly quiet. And the lot was open to the public. So no, it is not the same, and it is not a good comparison.
Thank you. And are there any other speakers speaking to, for, or against? Seeing no one rise, is there anyone on Zoom? Jillian? Nope. Thank you. I will close the public hearing. Thank you. And I will ask the board for their thoughts.
Can we take a break, or do you want to move through this one and then after?
Would people like a break?
I'm good.
You would like, I think I would prefer to, because we do have other applications
Yes,
after
okay.
this. So sorry about that, Jeff.
No, it's fine.
Any thoughts from the board members?
I can start with some comments just to.
Yes, please.
So let's see. Where to start? So I guess the first thing that I would start with, which I think is hopefully not too controversial for the board members, is I think the whole legal situation with the easement is, I actually find it interesting, but it's definitely not our. I don't think it would be right for us to vote on something or add stipulation, even if we were in favor of tilting it one way or another. To me, it seems that that type of situation belongs in a court of law to sort that out. And then, yeah, I guess I really want to so the neighbors are definitely a smart bunch, and they really dove into the details, and they really know a lot about this project. And I really do want to do what I think is best for them. And when I specifically look at the variance criteria, I think what's better for them is residential over commercial, because even if there's more residential units, commercial units create more traffic turnover. And then just that, related to that, the allowing the 10-foot ceiling on the first floor, to me, is more favorable than requiring a higher first floor. That kind of relates to the commercial situation, but it just seems to me that these two things are beneficial. And so similarly, also, I guess, kind of related to the whole first floor commercial situation is allowing something like a duplex or a row house. Again, I think no matter what, this property is going to get developed, and it can get developed without variances. I can see how the way in which it was presented could be deemed threatening, but the reality is they could by right build something there that is not too different than this, and in my personal opinion could be somewhat more detrimental that they could build by right to the neighborhood. And relating to all that, I have my own thoughts on the design stuff, but we're not granting the variances have nothing to do with height, the number of units, or the parking. I would like to know the exact final plan being proposed. Although even if we knew that, it would change over the next, the other boards that the applicant would have to go to. And so because we're not voting for variances on those, I understand that it could affect a our board members' position on the project, but if we're not voting on those, we really are voting on commercial versus residential, a 10-foot ceiling instead of a 12-foot ceiling, and then the types of housing that, again, to me, it's beneficial to the neighborhood to have more broken up housing on this parcel, because I think one of the biggest detriments to the city is these, when you have a bigger parcel, a developer very often just builds a single bigger building on it because it's easier for them and they can by right. I think that the applicant here is honestly making a good faith effort to improve this project. I mean, I know it's a controversial thing, and I know it's it might not feel like it's just about that it's any big change, but it just I'm trying to strike the balance, and it seems to me that granting these variances would. I mean, I think some people will not be happy with any outcome, but within our control, I think this would be the best chance of helping or benefiting the neighborhood. Would be to be granting these variances because, again, it is a really big parcel. It's this unique property that if they develop this, it's not like the little 5,000 square foot lot next door is going to have this slippery slope where they just then put up a huge building there because they can't. And then these streets, I totally agree. I'm concerned about safety and traffic, but just by the very nature and design of these, I mean, it's such a charming little neighborhood, but these streets force you to drive slowly because they're so narrow and you don't have good line of sight. So if you're like leaving your home, you're not going to be like going 50 miles an hour out of your driveway, and you can very quickly get to Islington. But again, like I don't think we should be voting on traffic because that's not our purview or related to the variances. So I guess that's where I stand.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Mattson. Any thoughts?
Sorry, can I just add one more thing?
Sure.
I thought, again, I'm not big on commenting on architectural styles, but another thing that stood out to me was, and I understand people not being a fan of higher buildings, but the way this plan was developed, and I don't think it was an accident, is the higher buildings are further away from the single-family homes. They're towards the multi-family units and the parking garage. They're in the back part of the parcel, and towards Hill Street with those condominium units with the flat roofs, the Three Sisters. So I just thought that's another good example of the good faith effort.
Thank you. Any thoughts from this side of the board? Mr. Nees?
I just want to offer a couple without any detail, just to address a couple things that were brought up. One is, I think the history of the zoning in this area is troublesome to me. Not that I followed it before and really didn't understand any of it until it was brought up here. But I think from the board's point of view, I mean, it's really not our job to resolve problems with zoning or changes in zoning that didn't happen. That may be unfortunate, but I think that's really not something. We're here to enforce the ordinance as it exists, whether we think that's the way it should be or not. I also want to address some of the comments that were made that seem to think that somehow the board is outside of its lane by asking questions and details about the project. I think those kind of comments are off base, bluntly. As a member of the board, we have criteria. We're supposed to be concerned with the health, safety, and welfare. It's difficult of the public. Light and air are issues. The impact on the potential impact of the project on diminishing property values. Those are things that are difficult to understand without having a full understanding of what the project is. And so I think it's entirely appropriate that we try and make sure that we understand what is being proposed, particularly when this has been a complicated process where we've had multiple versions of this project come through over the time period to make sure we understand what's going on. I'll stop there for now.
Agreed. Just a reminder that we vote on the application as presented and advertised, and I think as board members, we need to understand what is presented and advertised, and therefore, all questions, I think, are in good faith by the board members. Anything else from this side of the board?
Oh, I'll weigh in. Everybody's had their say. I agree with Ms. Denise in that this board approves or denies applications as presented. Anything in that application is subject to our inquiry, whether the applicant or other board members like it or not. If there's something in that application that is problematic, I mean, that's on the applicant. I've been on the board 3 years now. Your application, Mr. Mattson, was a lot more professional than this is the fourth meeting on this one. Something was said earlier that, or maybe I read it, that the CDs are supposed to be transition zones. Well, for this application, we're transitioning from CD5, which is the highest, the most dense, everything we have, to GRC. It literally abuts it. There is no 4, there is no 3, there is no CD2 in between. So you're going from the most dense to the least dense. Tell me where the transition is in this application, because I'm not seeing it. That's all.
Ms. Record, any thoughts or comments? Ms. Mattson? So now that everybody has weighed in, I will weigh in as well. So I just want to thank the neighborhood who came out today and has come out repeatedly on this project. The applicants also for giving us another application tonight. We had a site walk this afternoon, 4 p.m., in which we were allowed to tour the site and get a better look at it and ask questions of the applicants, which we did. So I feel like we definitely have more than enough information. I find that this variance application is clean. I don't find the representation is that they will be between 40 and 48 units. I think the typo that Mr. Nees found is not fatal to this application. I just want to say a few things. I think the CD5 zoning for this is problematic for the reasons that Mr. Mantle said. It's not transitioning. I think that we all, I don't want to speak for anybody, but I do think the zoning for this property is problematic. There is nothing this board can do about that. We have to work with the zoning as we find it. We cannot remove the downtown overlay district. We cannot rezone this property. That can only be done by the city council. It cannot be done by us. The massing and the height of these buildings is determined by the CD5. There are no variances required for height or massing on these properties. The other thing is that I did check with Jillian, who said that there was a concern about the rooftops. The rooftops all are allowed in the CD5 zoning. The modulation, there was a request for us to sort of shorten the length of the buildings. We cannot do that because that's not what was presented. I would not even know whether or not if we tried to do that, what kind of application that would be. I will say that I am prepared to support this application. I think the variance requests, I don't like to look at them too narrowly. Of course, Attorney Bozen wants everybody to look at them narrowly because that's his job. But I think it is, at the very first meeting, Attorney Bozen made a very good argument as to why commercial does not fit in this area. And as I saw today on the site walk, I do not believe that it does. It is overwhelmingly residential next to it. The commercial will actually create more vehicular traffic in and out of the area. I think that if we give the variance for residential on the first floor, that obviously necessitates the difference in the floor heights, which I think are not a significant ask. And the building types are flow from that variance request, in that obviously we couldn't have row house, apartment, or duplex when you're supposed to have a commercial on the first floor. I have a lot of sympathy for the abutters in this, because I think that this is a big project in the middle of their neighborhood. But I think fundamentally that is a problem with the zoning, and we cannot change that. Despite what Attorney Mosen says, I would support a motion to approve. I would support it with two stipulations, however. The stipulation that is in our packet that says that the design and location of the buildings may change as a result of planning board review and approval. And I would put the stipulation in as to the property cannot be accessed by the residents of 361 Hanover, in ingress and egress through the Hill Street. Fire department can always go wherever it needs to go. And frankly, if there were concerns about how this would play out legally, I understand that that is not our purview. That is something that the applicant should have dealt with beforehand, and that was not done. So if we decide to approve that with that stipulation, that's just the result of that. I will say my concern for this, so I think that there is special conditions of this property that create the hardship for not having commercial on the ground floor. My concern was that easement. Was the easement, the stipulation would deal with the easement on the issue on Hill Street, which would benefit the direct abutters. My concern was that circulation through the property itself and exiting out onto Hanover. By representation of Attorney Lyons, that can be dealt with by rerouting the easement, which is done routinely as a matter of law, to actually make sure that that easement is still usable by the people on Hill Street. I think that is something that can be done. And therefore, that to me, that was a substantial justice thing, that there would be detriment to the people who are on Hill Street. I believe that by their attorney's own representation says that that can actually be dealt with separately. So, I mean, those are my thoughts. I don't know if anybody is ready to make a motion. I think that we've all weighed in.
I just wanted to make two more quick comments. One is, we accept these applications as presented, but anytime we approve an application, it can be modified by other boards, such as any, not just this one. But as mentioned, an actual stipulation of this is that it can be modified by the planning board, but Historic District Commission and others.
Well, this is not in the HDC.
Well, but I'm just saying as an
yeah.
example of how
Yeah.
applications that we accept as presented can be modified. And then another thing is that like if we tried to dictate the length of a building or something, that would get overturned in a lawsuit. That's not something that we do, is that specific level. If there's no variance request for it, that specific level of design criteria, as tempting as it may be. Okay. And then I totally agree about the whole zoning issue. I guess the one thing I would add is the chair said there's nothing we could do about it, but there is something we could do about it, which would be to grant a variance, which is used in a case where we feel that the zoning is not quite right for a specific parcel.
Mm-hmm. And I will say that the stipulation that the planning staff recommended was as a result of planning board review and approval. That does include TAC. TAC is an advisory committee to the planning board, and the planning board can choose to adopt, reject, or modify whatever recommendations come to them from TAC. So
I guess one other thing is I'm sensing that there's not total support for this project, so the possibility of voting on some of the, like for example, if we don't approve residential on the first floor, we have the Fisher v. Dover problem. Or I guess the applicant indicated they just wouldn't come back before the board, but if they, basically we would be ruling out residential on the first floor, which to me it's pretty objectively residential would be better for the neighborhood than commercial with traffic coming and going.
I think my concerns about that are that the applicant has chosen to go forward with 5 people on the board tonight. And also, I think that Fisher v. Dover would probably not apply to another application with residential on the floor, which was substantially different from this application. Because this is the application as presented and advertised. So, I mean, those are my thoughts. Mr. Neese?
So I guess I have 2 questions on the conditions that have been discussed. The first one related to future changes. Are those like unlimited?
What do you mean future changes? You mean?
Well, the possibility of changes happening at the planning board. We approve our variances based on a project that's brought before us. If it goes to the planning board and there are major changes to it, let's say it doesn't go, I'm making something up, which I realize may not be possible, but to illustrate my point, let's say they walk into the planning board and say, we want 60 residential units.
It
That
goes
would
the other
not-
direction where the planning board tells them how to change it, they don't just change it and get the planning board.
So it's going from the planning board to them. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, so
The next-
we are approving approving an application that has no more than 48 units.
Okay. So the next question I have related to the second criteria,
Yes.
which was,
It would be a suggested criteria for me at request of Attorney Lyons on behalf of his client, that the property there shall not be property ingress or egress to the property from Hill Street.
I'm unfamiliar with conditions that basically are restricting the behavior of people rather than strictly related to the property. Is that something that the board does routinely? The reason I'm asking this question is I'm looking at the New Hampshire Zoning Board of Adjustment Handbook, and it says conditions must relate to the land and are usually designed to remove features of the proposed use which are legally objectionable. I don't think we have a proposed use, though there was mention in a previous thing about access on Hill Street. And Hill Street is not part of the land in place here. I don't really have a question, I don't really have a problem with a specific condition, I just wonder whether that's a condition we can impose.
Perhaps we'll find out. I think that the land, the stipulation would relate to the land that is the subject of this application.
Okay, thank you.
I guess if we could just add on to that for a second is,
Well, actually, I think
Okay.
at this point, we should probably make if somebody's ready to make a motion. Because if we're talking about adding on to stipulations, we should probably.
oh no, I was going to add on to the discussion of the.
Oh, I'm
stipulation.
sorry.
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
go ahead.
Just that if that was a condition to get other board members in support, I would be amenable to that. But to me, the other part is like the applicant is currently they removed the street access to Hill Street. It's only a pedestrian.
They blocked it.
No, I'm saying in the proposed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the applicant blocked it,
Yeah.
so.
Oh, you're saying the other way, to allow the other residents to come.
Well, no, I think that, so the stipulation is that access to this property shall not be made from Hill Street. But today, when we went on the site walk, you saw that there was
Yeah, the concrete.
that's blocking,
Yeah.
yeah. So it's not to pedestrianize it, that was actually blocking the easement.
Yes, no, I'm saying the proposed plan in this application, which would be the end result, is, my understanding is they're not proposing a road to there, but although I guess that's open for, but my understanding was that it was for pedestrian access.
Well, I thought it was a road, it would be, because it has to be wide enough, remember, cars are going to be going, if approved, cars are going to be going into Building A, so,
Okay. Yeah, my understanding was the only entrance and exit was through Hanover Street as proposed.
Well, if we put this stipulation in, that will be a requirement.
Extra true?
Yeah.
Okay.
So I don't know is anyone ready to make, I cannot make a motion. Is anyone ready to make a motion?
I would be inclined to make a motion, although, yeah, I guess I could add that stipulation.
Then what's your motion, Mr. Mattson?
My motion is to approve the application as presented with the stipulations that there's possible changes from this going before the planning board. And then the other stipulation is that there is no traffic crossing the boundary line to Hill Street either way. Is that?
I would suggest looking at the stipulation that's on page 62 of our packet for the first one.
Yeah, so specifically that the design and location of the buildings may change as a result of planning board review and approval. Yep.
That would be the first stipulation.
Yep.
And the second stipulation, I suggested as a result of what Attorney Lyons says, that ingress and egress to 361 Hanover Street shall not be made through Hill Street.
But then also not allowing the Hill Street people through this parcel?
No, because that would be subject to an easement, the modification of an easement that will probably be done by Attorney Lyons and Attorney Bozen. So I think that the concern is that people who reside on 361 Hanover, not those who live on Hill Street, but those who reside on 361 Hanover will not be using Hill Street to get into the property.
Yeah, I understand that. It just seems that if you can go one way but not the other, it seems,
Well, ingress and egress.
okay. So just the egress from 361?
I would say ingress and egress.
Oh, no, okay. Yeah, so the stipulation is that there will be no ingress and egress from this parcel onto Hill Street?
That it shall not be accessed through Hill Street.
As stated by the chair.
Except that I can't make motions, but anyway.
Well, no, but I'm
Okay.
making the
No,
stipulation
I mean, okay.
with those words.
Right.
Can I just clarify, is that going to be with signage, with paint, with actual physical features that block the ingress and egress? I think we would need some direction on that.
Perhaps a bollard or a sign?
I'll just make the motion with only the one stipulation that about the planning board design and approval.
Okay, so you withdraw the second stipulation?
I do.
Okay.
And then if this doesn't pass, we can make future motions.
Okay. Is there a second for Mr. Mattson's motion so that he can go to the criteria?
A second.
Okay.
Seconds?
So we'll take the first two criteria together. The variance is not contrary to the public interest and the spirit of the ordinances observed. So the proposed use must not conflict with the explicit or implicit purpose of the ordinance. In this case, the proposed use is a residential multi-family dwelling in a neighborhood of residential multifamily and single-family homes. And that it won't alter the essential character of the neighborhood, threaten public health, safety, or welfare, or otherwise injure public rights. Again, the building itself being proposed, the massing, the dimensions, the height, the length, all of that is allowed by right here. So it wouldn't, because that's allowed, it wouldn't threaten public health, safety, or welfare, or injure public rights. And the essential character of the neighborhood, I mean, there are other like down McDonough, there is another row home, and this is proposing a row home. The Heinemann building is already existing, and it used to be taller, so it's being restored closer to its original form. The other structures are like a duplex. Again, there's plenty of duplexes within 100 feet of where that duplex is being proposed. So, independent of details of, we heard a lot of details about roof types. I mean, it's a residential home, and we can't dictate the specific design. The next one is that the substantial justice is done. The benefit to the applicant should not be outweighed by harm to the general public or to other individuals. This is a rare situation for me where, again, I think approving this benefits both the applicant and the neighborhood, whereas denying it, specifically the residential portion and therefore the associated other two variances, denying them, I think it would certainly harm the applicant, but also harm the public. So I do believe substantial justice is done by approving this. The values of surrounding properties are not diminished. There hasn't been any expert testimony, but in general, new construction with parking fetches a premium, particularly this close to downtown, and it's certainly a better use for the property than a parking lot. Having residential homes next to other residential homes, I don't think will diminish the property values, or I haven't been convinced that the property values would be diminished other than conjecture. And the last criteria is that literal enforcement of the ordinance would result in unnecessary hardship because of special conditions of the property that distinguish it from others in the area. There is no fair and substantial relationship between the general public purposes of the ordinance provision and the specific application of that provision to this property, and the proposed use is a reasonable one. Again, I think this is a reasonable use of adding residential to a residential neighborhood instead of commercial. Again, I think the fair and substantial relationship is, we could express our thoughts and feelings about how it's zoned, but that is not our purview to change the zoning. But variances can provide some relief. I think it just doesn't make sense to have commercial on this property. I understand the reason why zoning wants commercial on the ground floor to activate the streetscape in the downtown areas. And this is on the edge of that, but it doesn't add up to me. And then the other two variances about the height of the first floor, again, allowing it to be less tall, I think is beneficial. And the reason for the variance suggesting the taller height on the first floor is also because of the commercial aspect. And then additionally, the not allowing the duplexes or row houses, that the point of that is because the downtown is so dense that would be out of place. But with this parcel being on the periphery as it transitions to the GRC district that has those exact housing types, it makes, I don't think there's a fair and substantial relationship. And again, the special conditions that distinguish this property from the area are, it is an abnormally large lot that has the development potential because it's underutilized with a vast surface parking area. And then the existing Heinemann building is certainly a unique aspect. So I guess I'll just leave it there.
Does the second have anything to add? No. Okay, so the motion on the floor is to approve the variances as presented and advertised with the following stipulation: the design and location of the buildings may change as a result of the planning board review and approval. So I'll start. Ms. Record?
Yes.
Mr. Nees?
Yes.
Mr. Mannel?
No.
Mr. Mattson?
Yes.
And the chair votes yes. The motion has gotten the required 4 approvals for passing even on a 5-person board. So you are approved.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone. We are going to be taking a break. We have the 5-minute break. We have still one item of old business to do, but the new business item that we have today, we also have 5 members. So I think if you could approach Jillian during the break and see if you would like to move your application to the next hearing. We can take that out of order. We'll have to take it out of order. Thank you. We're on recess. Okay, we are back, and we are on the last item of old business. And Mr. Rayum has resumed his seat. The next item of old business is Roman numeral 2D, the request of Millport Incorporated owner for property located at 1001 Islington Street, whereas relief is needed for a change of use to extend the existing health club into the adjacent unit, wherein relief is required from the zoning ordinance, including the following special exception from section 10.440, use number 4.42, to allow a health club greater than 2,000 square feet of gross floor area. Said property is located on Assessor Map 172, Lot 4, and lies within the Character District 4W District. Who is here to speak to this application?
Hi, my name is Kyle Bowser. I'm here on behalf of both Millport Inc. as the building owner and FormFit New Hampshire LLC as the business owner representative.
Thank you for your patience.
Yes, of course.
So you'll have 15 minutes to actually present your application, okay?
Okay. So I'm here to discuss the proposed Form Fitness expansion project at 1001 Islington Street, units C1 and C2. On page 7 of my submittal, I have the site plan, which shows kind of these two separate buildings here.
Okay.
So unit C1 is the front, which is the currently vacated commercial space, and unit C2 is the back, where the current FormFit Pilates studio is located. So the project is for the Form Fitness to expand into the adjacent space. Their current space is 1,530 square feet, and they're proposing expansion into the adjacent space of 1,695 square feet. It was previously a commercial space. It remains a commercial space. And the plan is to turn the existing workshop into a new yoga studio, which can be shown on pages 3 and 4 for the floor plans. And so it was previously a workshop. There was an office in the bathrooms. So most of it will be remaining the same, where we'll be turning the workshop space into a yoga room, and the rest will mostly remain. The bathroom gets slightly larger, and then an office space for administrative work with a potential for an ice bath recovery room. And all the changes will primarily be interior upgrades with no real exterior changes, except for a new window, which the fit up for the yoga studio was done recently, and can be seen examples for that fit up, and those exterior changes can be found on pages 5 and 6, which kind of shows what the plan for this would be for the interior and the exterior changes. So this is what happened with the first phase for the exterior upgrades, and there wouldn't be any real exterior changes for this one except for the new window by the ramp, and which would better match what the new window is on the backside. And as far as the special exception for this area, I can speak more to each specific criteria. So number 1, the standards is provided by this ordinance for the particular use permitted by special exception. The proposed studio expansion, we believe it's allowable under the current zoning ordinance subject to the special exception. It will adhere to all applicable design, safety, and operational standards outlined in the ordinance, including building code compliance and compatibility with surrounding property uses. All necessary permit and inspections will be obtained to ensure compliance. Number 2, no hazard to the public or adjacent property on account of potential fire, explosion, or release of toxic materials. There will be no hazard to the public or adjacent property on account of potential fire, explosion, or release of toxic materials. The expansion of the studio does not create any significant potential for hazards such as potential fires, explosions, etc., based on the intended use of the space. In addition, the existing Millport building, including unit C1 and C2, have an existing fire alarm and fire suppression system, and this expansion project will include any required modifications to ensure proper coverage per NFPA code. The Number 3, no detriment to property values in the vicinity or changes essential characteristics of any area, including residential neighborhoods, caused by parking, accessway, odor, smoke, gas, etc. We don't believe there will be any detriment to the property values in the vicinity or changes essential characteristics, as there will be no significant exterior changes. It'll be primarily focused on the interior upgrades. And the regular daily functions of the expanded fitness center will not cause any disruption to neighboring dwellings in the form of odors, smoke, gas, noise, etc. And there will be no unsightly outdoor storage of equipment or other materials. Number 4, no creation of traffic safety hazard or a substantial increase in the level of traffic congestion in the vicinity. Parking for the Pilates studios in a separate lot, backed away, which was again shown on page 7. Sorry for jumping back and forth. But it's back away from Islington Street, and part of the first phase for the Form Fitness in the current space was adding a few spaces in the back there, accounting for the total, the 3,600 square foot of the commercial space along with the residential. So the parking's already been accounted for previously. And there, number 5, no excessive demand on municipal services, including but not limited to water, sewer, waste disposal, police, and fire protection in schools. There will be no significant increase in demand on municipal services since there is no new water, sewer, waste disposal required beyond what is already available on site and has been used previously. We'll just be upgrading the bathroom fixtures in kind, just with new ones. Number 6, no significant increase in stormwater runoff onto adjacent properties or streets. There'll be no significant increase in stormwater runoff. There's existing catch basins and drainage in the parking lot, and this project scope will again be mostly interior upgrades with no changes to exterior grades or anything like that.
Okay. Are there any application, excuse me, are there any questions for the applicant from the board? Mr. Rayam?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So you talked a little bit about parking, and I guess I just wanted to understand that a little bit better. So according to the staff report, there's 109 parking spaces on the total lot. So there's your commercial use on the very end of the lot, and then a 63-unit apartment building occupying the rest of it. The staff report indicates that 10 parking spots are required for your the expanded size business. What is do you understand what the requirement is for the rest of the parking for the property as a whole, and why is it that you feel that you're still within, able to find the necessary parking on the on site for the 10 spots required?
Sure. So the parking calculation based on the first round, when we previously did the C2 expansion and added the spots, it was based on the a calculation of 94 and a half parking spaces required for the 63-unit residential units. And then there was the calculation for 3,600 square feet of commercial space at 14.4 spaces required. And so we now have the 94 and a half plus the 14.4 for the 109 required spaces. And that was done for the total C2, C1 and C2 spaces for the 3,600 square feet. It's slightly actually less than that inside with the two, the total square feet. It's less than the 3,600s with a little bit more parking.
Okay, I think I kind of follow most of that. So you're saying basically the residential use is roughly 90 some odd spaces, which leaves, at least a net of more than 10 spots for your business.
Correct.
Use. Okay. And there is kind of some segregation on the lot going back to our page 109 of the of our packet that we have. It does appear there's 6 spots plus a 7th spot that's a parallel park. I don't know if that's a handicap spot or how that's defined, but they're sort of segregated away from the main parking area it's probably closer to the residential areas. Any concerns with the additional parking being, a little bit farther away, or anything that's been expressed for concerns from the apartment owners or the apartment building owner?
No, we added the parking spots in the back. It was an unused space, and it allowed us to get to that 109 required for the 3,600 square feet for the commercial spaces, along with the 63 residential units. And then there's the benefit of the fact that the commercial and the residential tenants kind of offset each other during the day. A lot of residential spots open up. So it's a completely shared use. Those 6 spots in the back are primarily used just for the Pilates, but the front has been always mixed use for the commercial and the residential. And like I said, during the day, residential kind of clears out when they go to the jobs, where primarily that's when the Pilates studio is used. And so there's a lot more free spaces. And so property management hasn't had any issues with parking in the past, or doesn't foresee having issues going forward.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions for the applicant? Okay. Thank you. So we will now open up the application to public hearing, although we are in a public hearing. Is there anyone here who is in favor of this application, would like to speak? Anyone on board? No. Is there anyone who would like, you can sit down.
Okay.
Is there anyone who would like to speak to, for, or against the application? Okay. Seeing no one rise, I will close the public hearing. And I'll look for a motion or discussion from the board.
Madam Chair, I move to approve the special exception requested as presented and advertised.
Okay, is there a second?
Second.
Motion by Mr. Rayam, second by Mr. Mannel.
Okay. So for special exception criteria, standards provided by this ordinance for this particular use are permitted by special exception. It is recognized the applicant is going from one category of the special exception to another, which has triggered this need for to appear before the board. No hazard to the public or adjacent property on account of potential fire explosion or release of toxic materials. Certainly everything that's been described about the nature of the business and my understanding of the business would indicate that none of that would be a concern. No detriment to property values in the vicinity or change in the essential characteristics of any area, including residential neighborhoods or business and industrial districts. So this is kind of a crossover. This whole length of Islington Street has sort of this combined mix of some residential uses, some business uses, some light industrial type uses, all sort of mixed together. This particular lot is another example of that, which it's primarily residential with this small little business use on the end, which is not surprising. Again, very much of the characteristic of the neighborhood. It's really just a expansion of an existing use that has proven to be very compatible with the residential uses. So I do not see any detriment of property values. And other things to take account of, scale of buildings, the size of the structure is not changing. The applicant is simply occupying more of it. Parking areas, so we did have some discussion about that. There is sufficient parking to meet all of the requirements for both uses that are there. Access ways, odor, smoke, gas, dust. Again, none of those are concerns. Other pollutants. Noise, again, not a particularly noisy business in any way, shape, or manner. Glare, heat, vibration, or unsightly odor, unsightly outdoor storage of equipment, vehicles, or other materials. Again, none of those would apply in this instance. Next criteria is no creation of a traffic safety hazard or substantial increase in the level of traffic congestion in the vicinity. Again, the increase in the size of still what is a relatively modest business on a relatively busy road that has all kinds of other similar business, residential, and light industrial types of uses along it. The small increase in potential clients for this space would not cause any kind of a traffic concern. Next up is no excessive demand on municipal services, including but not limited to water, sewer, waste disposal, police and fire protection, and schools. Again, this nature of this business does not place any unusual demands on any of those. And lastly, no significant increase in stormwater runoff onto adjacent property or streets. Again, the structure that's being proposed here is the same as what was there before. There's really, the whole area is largely consistent of probably impervious surfaces, but there's no substantial change in any of that as a result of the requested increase in the size of the business. With that, I recommend approval.
Thank you. Anything from the second?
No.
Okay, so the motion is to approve the special exception as presented and advertised. Mr. Mattson?
Yes.
Mr., oh wait, where am I going? Mr. Rayum?
Yes.
Mr. Mantle?
Yes.
Mr. Nees?
Yes.
Ms. Rickard?
Yes.
And the chair votes yes. Vice chair votes yes, you're approved.
Acting chair.
Acting chair.
which
Okay.
means-
We are finally on new business at 9:40 at night. The next item is Roman numeral 3, new business A. The request of Paula J. Reed, Revocable Trust owner for property located at 410 Richards Avenue, whereas an equitable waiver is needed for the construction of a garage, which requires the following. 1, an equitable waiver for an accessory structure with a 3-foot left side yard where 3.5 feet was previously granted. Said property is located on Assessor Map 112, Lot 10, and lies within the General Residence A District. Mr. Nees is recused from this application and will be leaving for the rest of the night. There are 5 voting members. The applicant has opted to go forward. And so would the applicant please, who is here to speak to this application? Okay, could you please state for the record that you are willing to go forward with just 5 voting members?
I am more than willing to go forward with just 5 voting members.
I'm fully understanding that you're required to get 4 positive votes.
Yes, so you may not know this because you don't spend your time at meetings like this, but when there is a short board, there are 5 people here. You can't just get a majority of the votes. You have to get 4 votes because 4 is the majority of a 7-person vote. A 7-person
That's fine.
board.
I'm okay.
Okay, all
Give it
right.
a shot.
Okay.
There we go.
It's a grade of an 80.
There you go. What the heck, right? I've been here all night. So I'm Paula Reed, and I am the owner of 410 Richards Avenue. Okay. I am here to request an equitable waiver. I was, by notice of decision on December 26th, I was given a variance, I was granted a variance to tear down an existing garage on my property. It was dilapidated, and in tearing it down and then building a new one that conformed to the dimensional requirements that were granted in the approved variance. The variance granted me to allow a slightly longer and slightly higher pitched garage while maintaining a 3.5 right side yard setback. The variances were needed to lengthen the garage and to keep an existing 3.5 foot right yard setback and slightly enlarge building coverage. So this application focuses on an encroachment to the variance that allowed the 3.5 yard setback. So I was granted the variance, which also enabled me to solve a major drainage problem that I had on the property. Took down the garage, fixed the drainage property. They started building the garage. They went in, my builder measured it, got the 3.5, put the stakes in, and then when they came to excavate, they had to take the stakes out because it's such a tight area that they had to remove the stakes in order to dig. And then when they replaced them back, they measured off of the wrong point, which was, I guess, my neighbor's fence, apparently. They measured off the far side of it, and it's 4 inches, and that's what, and they put the stakes in, they put the stakes in the forms report, the foundation was built, the garage was then built, and then the city, requires a as-built survey for the foundation acceptance, right? Yeah. Sorry, I've lost my notes. Hang on 1 second. Required foundation certification. So the same surveyor who had done the original plan for the original variance application came out, resurveyed it. That survey is Exhibit C, which has been submitted and accepted as accurate by the city. And that shows that the front corner of the garage encroaches 4 inches into the variance allowed 3.5 foot yard setback. And the rear corner encroaches 1 inch into the same 3.5 foot yard setback. So I am requesting an equitable waiver from the 3.5 yard setback established by the variance granted December of 2023 to allow the garage construction to be completed per the McInerney Survey Associates Foundation certification, which is Exhibit C to the application. I believe that this application qualifies for an equitable waiver of dimensional requirement because it meets all 4 criteria. The first was the violation was not noticed until the structure was to the state that it is right now, which is about 85% complete. So it was an after-built. Since it was discovered, there's been no more work done on the garage, and it's sitting there. Luckily, with the snow, I've been able to drive into it. The violation was the result of a good faith error in measurement. It just happened. The general contractor had staked it appropriately, as I had said. There was a miscalculation when it got restaked, and there was no malice or intent to, work around what the original variance was. The physical or dimensional violation does not constitute a public or private nuisance, nor does it diminish the value of other property in the area. It's 4 inches of a garage against a fence. And due to the degree of past construction and investment, the cost of correction far outweighs the public benefit. The garage is 85% done. And so based on that, I request an equitable waiver of dimensional requirement.
Okay. Are there any questions from the board for the applicant? Nothing? Is there anyone here to speak in favor of this application? Anyone online? No. Is there anyone to speak to, for, or against this application?
Madam Chair, I would just note that we did receive a letter that was in opposition.
Yes, so in our packet tonight, we did receive a written objection from the direct abutter that is in our packet and is in our record. So, is there anything else? Okay. So with that, I will close the public hearing. I'll wait a motion by the board. I do want to note, though, if we do move to grant the request, staff has recommended that the board acknowledge that this approval will correct the relief granted for the left side yard where it was noted as the right side yard in the previous variance request.
And I guess that would be my one request. Could staff just speak to that a little bit? What is going on with that situation?
Yes, in the original variance that was granted, it was noted as a, hold on, let me just get it right.
Right.
It was supposed to be the left yard.
It was noted as a right side yard in the relief that was given, when in fact it should have been noted as a left side yard. So if you grant this tonight, please note that it is a left side yard here.
Which is why on ships you say port and starboard. It tells you which direction you're headed in. Okay.
Okay, is there anyone who would like to make a motion with that stipulation?
Yeah, Madam Chair, I would move to grant the requested equitable waiver with the stipulation as noted that this also will correct prior advertising error of indicating that the setback was to the right side yard when in fact it is to the left side yard.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Ram. Is there any second?
I'll second.
Mr. Mannel seconds, and could you speak to your motion, Mr. Ram?
Yes, thank you. So equitable waivers, there's 2 pieces to it. One is that something that's existed more than 10 years by the applicant's admission. This is the result of a brand new dimensional issue with how the structure was actually built. In recognizing, just prior to going through the criteria, just to recognize, as we did indicate, there was a direct abutter who provided some concerns back to the board, and I had an opportunity to read them, understand what their concerns were. I don't think that they are sufficient for us to not grant the equitable waiver. Probably one of the most significant concerns is the size of the eave. However, per our zoning ordinance, gutters, cornices, or eaves projecting not more than 30 inches from a vertical wall are not considered to be part of the setback requirement. So you're actually allowed to go 30 inches from a wall surface. As shown in the applicant or the abutter's letter of opposition, the actual dimension here is probably at maximum about 18 inches. So it falls about 12 inches short of where there would be a concern. So clearly, we like prairie-style homes or something that with large eaves. We allow them per our zoning ordinance. So even though the applicant probably did make the eaves somewhat larger than perhaps originally indicated, they are still within the allowable amount for our zoning ordinance. So with that, just going through the equitable waiver criteria, that the violation was not noticed or discovered by any owner, former owner, owner's agent, or representative, or municipal official until after a structure in violation had been substantially completed. So again, this error that occurred, which really ultimately comes down to a few inches, and this is Portsmouth, every dimension is tight, and so a few inches can become potentially important, but I think that the error was one that is understandable in terms of the construction methodology that had to be used. Again, considering that many of these lots are very narrow, and the construction techniques that have to be used are sometimes a little bit extraordinary. So there apparently came about some confusion that really wasn't fully understood until the survey that was required to be done by the inspection department, which they do. And sometimes we find in many instances, if we have a property that's never been surveyed, and an applicant has come before us, and sometimes that survey does reveal things that weren't understood. In this case here, I think the property was better understood, and I think there was an understanding of where the foundation should have been placed. However, with the construction methodology, it did end up to be slightly off. That the violation was not an outcome of ignorance of the law or ordinance, failure to inquire, obfuscation, misrepresentation, or bad faith on the part of any owner, owner's agent, or representation, but was instead either a good faith error in measurement or calculation made by an owner, owner's agent. So there's some other stuff in there, but it really is that first case. It's really a case here of, we had some pretty tight measurements, some pretty tight tolerances, and that in the process of the construction that a slightly misaligned foundation was placed. It wasn't an attempt to create a larger structure or do something entirely nefarious, at least in terms of the actual placement of the foundation, which again is what we are measuring to. Some of the other elements of the building structure, including the eaves, is not something that is measured, at least not until it becomes more than 30 inches. That the physical or dimensional violation does not constitute a public or private nuisance, nor diminish the value of other property in the area, nor interfere with the adversely with the effect any present or permissible future uses of any such property. So again, this is a couple of inches off, understanding that it does put it a little bit closer to the next abutter. But that said, overall, from the perspective of this board, in terms of where the foundation lies, it really is not going to make a substantial difference with being a couple of inches closer. Probably some of the bigger concerns, as the applicant has indicated, with drainage and whatnot, are things that are addressed by the nature of the project and therefore not substantially affected. And lastly, that due to the degree of past construction or investment made in ignorance of the facts constituting the violation, cost of correction and so far outweighs any public benefit to be gained. So again, the survey after the foundation is created and the contractor work continues, the survey is then performed. That's where the error was discovered, resulting in fairly substantial completion of the project. And really, for the general public purposes of trying to correct that, it is not worth the imposition onto the property owner. So with that, I say it has met all the criteria and that the equitable waiver should be approved.
Okay, is there anything from the second?
Nope.
Okay, so the motion is to approve, and I will start with, where am I starting? Okay, Ms. Record.
Yes.
Mr. Mannel.
Yes.
Mr. Rayum.
Yes.
Mr. Mattson.
Yes.
And the chair votes yes. You have your approval for an equitable waiver, and that is 5-0. Yeah, so the next order of business was if the equitable variance was not granted, the applicant was going to ask for an after the fact variance. Would you like to withdraw that application? Okay. There's a letter of withdrawal. Thank you. Okay.
Thank you very much. I wanted to also say, I have been so appreciative and impressed by the people who work at the city who have helped through this entire process, and I would like to make a public acknowledgement of their professionalism and their patience and how thorough they are.
That's nice of you. Thank you. Nice of you to say. Technically, it's not a public hearing, but I will say that we won't.
Go ahead and say it.
Sure.
Thanks, Paula.
We need to work on left versus right, but outside of that.
Yeah, exactly. So fundamental.
That was 2 years ago. I'll just say I wasn't.
So next will
I do
be right
struggle with
versus
the
wrong.
perspective,
Yeah, exactly. So with that, we have concluded all of our business for tonight. I'll ask for a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn?
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Get a second.
Whatever.
Second.